The United States saw some of the darkest hours in its history during World War II, like the landings on D-Day or the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But an even darker stain was rapidly growing at home, all across the country. You'll view firsthand the absolute betrayal of the Japanese-American internment camps and how a nation was turned against its own people. The internment camps were some of the most flagrant abuses of human rights on American soil. People who had been citizens for generations were liquidized and treated like animals. But how did we get here? Let's go back to the start of the war. No, in order to understand the full picture, we need to go back further. The year is 1924. The Asian Exclusion Act has just been passed, effectively banning all immigration from Japan and other quote-unquote non-desirable Asian countries. This was a slap in the face to Japan, who had just been a key ally to the United States in World War I. Even worse, racist legislation stoked tensions further. It prevented all foreign-born Japanese from becoming citizens, which took away many rights like property ownership. Fast forward to Pearl Harbor. Immediately after the attack, the US declares war on Japan, and anti-Japanese sentiment is rallied with alarming speed. War propaganda is being spread through the radio and television. Worries begin spreading of a potential spy network of Japanese Americans. General DeWitt was quoted as saying, "It makes no difference whether he is an American citizen," end quote. So, let's recap. Fear, racism, and propaganda were all ways whites turned against Japanese Americans. But how did they actually force them into camps? President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the infamous Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. In terms of who was sent to the concentration camps, those with as little as 1/16th Japanese ancestry were incarcerated. None of the more than 125,000 people moved were ever charged with a crime or given a trial. It was the single largest forced relocation in US history. But what were the camps themselves like? When Japanese Americans arrived at the camps, they saw barracks with tar-papered covered roofs, with no plumbing or cooking facilities of any kind. 25 people were housed in a room made to fit 4. Bathrooms had no partitions and were mostly out in the open. Camps had a budget of 45 cents per person a day for food. Some prisoners tried to walk outside the fences and were shot. An internee said, "If we were put here for our protection, why were the guns at the guard towers pointed inwards instead of outward?" End quote. Quality of medical care was dismal. There was less than one doctor per 1,000 inmates, and they prioritized immunizations rather than general health and surgery. Immediately after release, there was nowhere to turn. Many had simply been fired as a result of their heritage, and after the war, nobody would take them back. Aforementioned laws prevented the Japanese from owning their homes, so they took huge financial losses when trying to buy their previous land back. Upon returning to the West Coast, many homes were set on fire or bombed. The same racism that put Japanese into camps followed them around when they left. In 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which gave $20,000 to each of those still alive who had once been interned. This only reached about 80,000 of the full 125,000. And for everyone, no amount of money could recover what they lost. In conclusion, countless lives were irrevocably changed when Executive Order 9066 was signed. In total, 2,000 died in the camps themselves, and over 2/3 of all interned were current citizens. Japanese incarceration was one of America's greatest betrayals and went against every ideal America had. The pain and suffering reverberates in Japanese American families today and reminds us to always know our past. This has been History with Reese. Subscribe to learn something new.